My name is Rachel Voth-Schrag, and I am the co-primary investigator of this study, led by our dear colleague and friend, Dr. Leela Wood, who is on her way driving back from the TAASA conference in Denton right now. And so from the research team today, I am representing us along with Allie Jacobs from the University of Texas Health Science Center, Houston, McGovern Medical School, and I am at the University of Texas at Arlington. And we were absolutely thrilled to be joined by Celinda from the Houston Area Women's Center, one of our partner agencies on this project and a leader in digital hotline services statewide, nationwide. And so she's going to be sharing with us and answering questions and giving us the sort of all the insight about how to actually do this kind of really impactful, important work. But first, I get the opportunity to share with you about the research that we've done in partnership with Hawk, as well as with Safe Alliance in Austin over the last 3-4 years, looking at the impacts of digital hotline as a service model in local sexual assault agencies, as well as sort of the way that hotline is experienced when provided in that format by survivors and by service providers, and also some of what we learned about how hotline improves the outcomes of the folks that are using it. I'm very thankful to my colleague Allie, who is monitoring the chat. And so if you have questions as we go along, she probably knows the answers. She was the project manager on this, along with being a longtime advocate in local agencies. She also was the project manager of this research project. And so she will be answering questions in the chat as we go along. And if there are questions that come along as I'm sharing some of the outcome data and the findings from the study, she'll interrupt me and let me know, and we can talk about it then. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to leave lots of time for a conversation with Celinda and for your questions for her. So that's kind of the plan for the afternoon. But what we want to start with to let you know a little bit about what we've been studying and what we've learned is we're going to talk a little around the reason that this was an important set of questions to ask now and sort of what we did, the kind of data we collected, and then what we learned about what chat and text hotline looks like, what digital hotline looks like when it's offered in local agencies where maybe in the past what you've predominantly had is a phone hotline as a front door to service. And then we're going to share what we learned about the experiences of a group of 300 survivors who chatted into a hotline for the first time, and who we then were able to follow over about 6 months after they had that initial chat and text hotline interaction. We'll be able to tell you something about what we learned about who they are, as well as what their experiences of victimization and re-victimization were like, and what their health, economic, and sort of mental health and safety outcomes were over the next 6 months. And then the thing that I'm certainly the most excited about is that we've got time to have a question and answer session with a digital hotline expert to talk about how to make this an effective approach, and how to implement it in ways that work not just for survivors, but for the staff that are doing the important work. Because one of the things that we absolutely learned was how valuable trained and resourced staff were, and that this is a hard thing to do. And so, the respect and development of ways to make this work sustainable over time for staff is one of the things that we'll get the chance to talk to Celinda about. Okay. So digital hotlines are a natural evolution of the kind of service model that domestic violence and sexual assault service agencies have been providing in the local setting since the 1970s. 24/7 hotline support, being able to pick up your phone and call someone verbally, has been a cornerstone of IPV, sexual assault, and human traffic service provision since local agencies have been around. They have traditionally been the primary access point for connection to those sorts of formal support systems that are linked to that sort of voluntary set of services offered in local communities. Not only are there hotlines at many local domestic violence service agencies, but there are also national hotlines providing these sorts of services that see really high call volumes. So in 2022, there were 27,000 calls to the National Sexual Assault Hotline monthly, over 16,000 contacts yearly at the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and 500,000 calls answered at the National Domestic Violence Hotline. In Texas, our research team worked with the Health and Human Services Commission to get some data on local agency hotlines and determined an average of 194 phone hotline contacts per month per agency in 2022 and 2023. And in Texas, we see across those agencies, about 83 agencies, I think, a fairly consistent pattern of an increase in call volume in the summer months. Most hotlines use sort of advocacy, engagement, informal support, and safety plan as a primary model to engage with, assess with, and cooperate along with participants calling in to identify their needs and collaboratively build a plan for addressing those needs. Digital platforms are expanding rapidly across many industries, and crisis hotlines are not different. We've seen a real expansion in digital platforms in the last decade, with a particular spike around the COVID-19 pandemic that pushed a lot of services rapidly towards digitalization in ways that may have been slower previously. But we know that not a lot of Texas programs have digital hotlines, and we were lucky in this project to work with two of the first and most robust programs doing that work. Research has been limited, but what we have seen in previous phases of this study in Texas, and also in research that's been done with national hotlines and with university-based digital hotline models, is that in general, those interactions are seen as positive by participants, and that they have led to folks having an increase in their connection to formal and informal resources, and a sense of support being available and offered to them by the community, all of which are really positive and important central aims of sort of the hotline service model. But we don't still know a lot about those service experiences, and we really don't know what high quality service models look like for survivors using digital hotline, which is why we pursued this particular research project. And today we're really going to talk about some of the findings from the first two of our big research questions that we came into this project with, which are: what are the short and long-term outcomes of digital hotline, so chat and text hotline services? What's going on with survivors after they've used hotline, essentially, and to what extent do we think hotline might have something to do with that? And then what is the role of program fidelity and cost effectiveness? And we're going to talk today about program fidelity on digital hotline participant advocate outcomes. In other words, to what extent is it about this advocacy-focused, social connection-focused service model that leads to or supports the positive outcomes that we see? We also had some questions about the impact of COVID-19, but we're not going to talk about those today, unless you want to in the chat or conversation later. We recognizing that this is an understudied area, it's a new area, it's emerging, we took an approach to sort of digesting these questions, that having as many different viewpoints, as many different stakeholders involved, and as many different data streams as possible was an important aspect of doing this project well and with fidelity. So among other things, the data sources that we used to try to answer those three questions were a longitudinal quantitative survey with first-time digital hotline participants. What that means is that we worked with our partner agencies to identify folks that were chatting into the hotline for the first time. And we recruited them to complete a baseline survey within 7 days of that first interaction. And then we followed them over 6 months with subsequent follow-up surveys to see how their answers to questions about their health, their well-being, their victimization experiences, and their use of hotline changed over time. We also did a series of semi-structured interviews with digital hotline participants who we selected or identified from that longitudinal survey so we could understand more about their experiences in more of a conversational way. We worked with the staff at our two partner agencies to have them complete a checklist after they did a digital hotline session to talk about what kind of skills, behaviors, activities, and service sort of approaches they used in each of those sessions to understand what was going on from the staff perspective. And then we paired that with analysis of 328 digital hotline transcripts, de-identified for us that serious, time and effort on the part of our partner agencies to provide those to us that allow us to sort of compare what staff are seeing and then what we're seeing in the actual transcripts. We also did additional interviews with folks that used the service model sort of at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and interviews with service providers who work as digital hotline advocates and stakeholders in the community who interact frequently with hotline or with folks that they might refer to use hotline. So other domestic violence service providers or folks in the community that rely on chat and text hotlines as a strategy for working with people in their community. We were really interested in understanding model fidelity. And what that really means is what is actually going on in these sessions and how is that shaping survivor outcomes. So we use multiple data streams to analyze fidelity to the logic model, which is that list of what are we doing, what do we hope to see, and how do these changes get connected, along with the sort of the goals of hotline. So we found really strong evidence for alignment between the logic model from the first phase of our study and the services that are being provided at our two partner agencies. And we also were able to enhance the logic model and provide more information and more support to sort of articulate what the key advocacy behaviors are that are happening in hotline that are helping create positive change for survivors. We partially did that using the Foundations of Advocacy Behavior Scale that was developed by Chris Sullivan. And one of the things that we saw was really overall very high scores in the Foundations of Advocacy Behavior Scale that is aligned with really positive experiences of survivors with, in this case, their interactions with their hotline advocates. We also saw that those, high scores, high fidelity to advocacy behaviors was positively correlated with participant satisfaction with their hotline experience. So where we see advocates expressing empathy, where we see advocates engaging with a survivor in a collaborative safety planning process, where we see advocates demonstrating their care and their interest in meeting the safety needs of survivors, we simultaneously saw really positively reported experiences from survivors and strong satisfaction with services. The hotline approach and goals that we identified were overall that hotlines aim to provide support that is centered on the needs of the participants, informed by the experiences of trauma that folks come to chat and text hotline with, oriented around the need for justice in relationships and in society, and really facilitated by the importance of letting that survivor know that the person on the other end of the chat is a real person, that there is social connection that's happening, that there is support from a human, and that is something that can be accurately and effectively conveyed in digital spaces. Hotlines aimed for rapid engagement, meaning that survivors have quick access to support, and that's one of the primary aims of Hotline. They aim to help survivors identify their needs and options for meeting those needs, to help people expand their understanding of violence and to reduce harm impacts, to improve survivor safety, and to increase survivor access to support. And that can be in terms of support formally through the agency or through partner agencies, through referrals, or informally in terms of helping survivors identify who in their system and who in their community are important to engage with. A major part of us doing this research was that longitudinal study where we followed 307 first-time chat and text users who were at least 16 years of age over 4 time points. And then we were able to do follow-up interviews with 25 of those participants in English and in Spanish. We asked questions of those participants about their demographics, about their digital hotline service use experiences. So what was it like when they were chatting or texting with their advocate? How easy it was to access those services, and then what services they were able to access subsequently because of using the chat and text hotline. Their goals when they were chatting in and how those were paired with needs and met, their own mental and physical health, their experiences with different forms of interpersonal violence, including sexual assault, and their subsequent feelings of empowerment related to their own safety, their ability to manage their safety situation, and their hope for the future. Of these 307 participants, and we are very appreciative of our community partners who helped us recruit participants by putting a note about our study at the end of their chat and text hotline interactions. So we were able to work with these two community partners to sort of put a follow-up. Thank you so much for chatting today. We appreciate you. Please reach out again. If you're interested in participating in a follow-up study, please click this link kind of situation. And what we found of those 307 is that about 90% identified as female. They were on average 34 years old. But I think it's really important to note the range there. We had participants in our study from 17 years old, which was the youngest we could enroll in the study, not necessarily the youngest that are chatting and texting in, all the way to 65 years old. I think when we came into doing this work, I will certainly say and I don't think I'm alone in this, made the assumption that digital hotline was a young person's game. And one of the things we came around with is that that is not necessarily the case, that this is an intervention that is embraced and used beyond just folks who I would consider to be the young folks in the world. We had a really diverse sample of chat and text hotline participants, with 34% identifying as Black or African American, 30% as Hispanic or Latino or Latina, 10% identified as multiracial, 31% as white or non-Hispanic Caucasian, 4% as Asian, and 1% American Indian, Alaska Native, or Pacific Islander. Most were single, but about 80 were married or partnered, and 36 participants were divorced or separated. So we had a wide range of current relationship status represented. And most said they were in very good health, but it was a fairly, the statistic nerd in me will call that a normal distribution. We had a wide range of sort of people's self-reported health statuses, and nearly 50% of participants reported that they had a diagnosed disability of some sort, with the plurality of those being identifying some kind of mental health disability. In our validated screeners, so our measures that we use that were developed by psychiatrists for this purpose, 75% of participants screened as having probable post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is a population with high exposure and high trauma symptomology. And nearly 50% screened as having moderate to severe symptoms of depressive disorder, with almost 20% indicating potential problematic drinking, which we know is something that can be tied to coping with these kinds of mental health challenges and these kinds of trauma experiences. About half the participants were currently employed, full-time, part-time, or seasonally. But over half indicated a monthly income under $1,000. So this is a population that has high economic need, with over just under 30% never having experienced homelessness. So over 60%, nearly 70% of the population had at least one instance of homelessness. And many were in a renting or living with friends and family current housing situation. Although we had a number of participants either expressly reaching out for housing or in emergency shelter. This is a quotation from one of our interview participants who really highlighted the ability to build interpersonal connection on hotline with her advocate. So she said, the digital hotline advocate, she seemed sympathetic. She said, "I'm so sorry you're going through this. I can understand where that can be abrasive. It can be harmful. Are you feeling in danger right now? Is there anything?" She was very, very attentive and hopeful to me. She seemed really empathetic and sympathetic. It seemed like from the heart, she really wanted to help. It's a really beautiful testament to the kind of work that advocates are doing every day. Um, One of the interesting aspects of Hotline in general is that although the majority of folks that chat in are chatting for themselves, it's also a resource to support the informal and formal support people in folks' lives. So in our baseline survey, 90% of the participants said that they were chatting in because of their own experiences. But there's about 10% of folks who were chatting in to get support to help a child, a friend, a family member, or somebody that they were serving in a more formal role. Um, 87%, almost 88% of the participants contacted digital hotline for the first time on the same day that they took the survey. So that's just a way of saying these are folks really reporting their baseline experiences at the moment that they're reaching out. And it gives us some confidence in saying, looking at the changes over time and being able to tie that to that hotline experience. Um, Close to a quarter of participants at these two agencies said their main priority in chatting in was getting help with shelter, whereas slightly less than that, 22%, said their main priority was to get help with counseling. And this is unsurprisingly, like we see across agencies and across services, a high need and high victimization population. 81% of participants had shared at least one incidence of sexual violence at some point in their lives. And for nearly 40% of those, so about half of those who had experienced sexual violence, had experienced it in the past 6 months at baseline. So this is recent trauma. Um, si- um, Similarly, nearly half of participants endorsed at least one incident of human trafficking at some point in their lives, based on the kinds of items that we were asking, which are all behaviorally specific examples of sexual violence, of human trafficking, of relationship violence in a moment here. 17.8%, almost 18%, had experienced at least one incident of trafficking in the past 6 months at baseline. And we're going to come back to this in a moment. Experiences of intimate partner violence were nearly universal. 93% had experienced at least one incident of IPV in their lives. Over three quarters had experienced that at least one incident in the past 6 months. And keep in mind, only 90% were chatting in for themselves. So there is some percentage that were chatting in for someone else, but who also had these victimization experiences. 52% of participants had experienced psychological IPV in the last 6 months. 44% had experienced physical IPV. 32, almost 33% had experienced sexual IPV. And over 40% had experienced stalking or stalking behaviors in the past 6 months. Now I'm going to share some information about participant outcomes. So one of the things that we're able to do when we follow people over time is look at how they have changes in the outcomes that we're interested in helping support. One of the things that we saw was that survivors had significant improvements from baseline to the fourth time period at 6 months in their household economic situation. So those making less than $1,000 at baseline, that was 55%, that dropped to 47% at 6 months. So we saw a reduction of the number of survivors making less than $1,000. And comparatively, we saw almost a 5% increase in those making $3,000 to $4,000 a month between baseline and 6 months. We also saw a significant reduction between baseline and 6 months and folks reporting that they were having trouble finding housing, dropping from 68% to 59%. And this is in the context of two metropolitan areas where it is very difficult to find housing. And We saw a significant reduction in folks reporting that they were having trouble getting housing because of their credit, and those that were facing utility cutoff. That dropped from 50% of folks to just under 40% of folks. So across the board, there is still at 6 months substantial economic vulnerability and challenges, but we're seeing trends that indicate reduction in some of those risks, and increased access to financial security and housing security. We also saw that over time, participants had a increase in their sense of their own safety. So we ask a series of questions about how safe participants feel they are. And we saw a generalized increase in participants' feelings of safety from baseline to 6 months, as well as a significant increase in participants' self-reported internal tools for managing safety. This is a sort of a interesting measure that we use in violence-focused research to sort of understand what's going on with participants as they're thinking about their own safety, recognizing that ultimately it is people who choose to use abuse, people who choose to use violence, who are creating violence. But that one of the things that we can support survivors around is their identification of their own tools to navigate the situations that they're in, and their ability to identify community-based tools and community supports to help address the safety threats that they're facing. And one of the places where we saw the most significant change, and I think it ties really clearly and nicely to the programmatic service model of Digital Hotline, is in participants' self-rated internal tools for addressing safety. Over time, participants felt more confident and more empowered to manage their situation and to seek support from their communities as necessary. Here's an example quotation around that. I think it had a very positive impact on my safety. I feel like you may try to hurry up and call somebody and then forget to clear your call log. And then say your abuser comes in and says, who is this? And the call number is on and you were trying to do this. And say you're on the chat. You could hurry up and exit the browser and clear your history. And that's that. I feel like it was a safer option than calling. Like I said, I feel like it had a very positive impact on my safety. So this is a survivor who's identifying not only that the skills that they learned were really helpful, but that the modality itself, being able to do it via text or via chat, felt like a safer option for them than a phone call as part of a crisis hotline intervention. One of the things people really are always curious about and want to know more about is the extent to which we see a change in the violence being experienced by participants in chat and text hotlines. We saw significant reductions from baseline to follow-up in reported physical IPV and reported psychological IPV. We also saw a reduction, though it did not raise to the level of statistical significance, in sexual IPV. We saw fairly steady rates of sexual violence and stalking. And we saw a significant increase from baseline to 6 months in reports of human trafficking. And, it's one of the things that we always sort of wonder about is what's going on in some of those pathways. And I think, part of what we see, and this is a pattern that we see repeated in our research. So this is not distinct to our hotline research. It comes up in a lot of our violence intervention research that the form of violence can sometimes shift from immediate, especially physical, psychological, and sexual violence to behaviors like stalking and trafficking, which just have some more stickiness around them. And which those initial safety plans and internal tools for addressing safety seem maybe slightly less efficacious against. We saw significant reductions in those initial depression and PTSD symptoms. As we reported initially, our population had almost 75% of the baseline survey had probable PTSD at baseline. That was dropped to 55% at follow-up. And there was a sort of consistency in self-reported physical health and in hazardous drinking. Based on the models of Hotline, I think some of the things we were most interested in learning about were how participants were feeling about their community, their ability to connect with services, and their sort of overall place in the world. And so we were very interested to see and pleased to see a significant increase from baseline to 6 months in the level of hopefulness that participants were reporting, as well as how supported they felt by their social support network and their community. One participant shared, I was able to start having the courage to reach out and get help from people and admit that I needed help because I have a lot of pride and a huge ego and I don't like asking for help. It showed me that it was okay to start asking for help. And in the process of doing that, it helped kind of open my eyes to my living situation. That one chat experience is what led me to start asking for help and trying to get a sense of community. I started attending church and everything again because of it. That is a really powerful testimony to the way that empathic engagement, even at a distance, even over a screen, can really transform and transition someone's experiences. So in summary, and then I've got some questions for Celinda, and we're also going to give you all a chance to ask your questions of Celinda. The things that we want you to take away from this research and what we've learned are that digital hotlines appear to be an effective intervention that can improve the health and safety of survivors, that can reduce violence, and can support reductions in financial instability. They serve as a gateway for connection to other support services. So they're an important front door and deserve attention in that way. And that it's important to equip hotline advocates and services that provide hotline with accessible financial and housing resources, because that's something people are coming repeatedly to hotlines with a sort of explicit need around. And that we saw really high levels of fidelity and enactment of trauma-informed service models and survivor-centered service models in the provision of digital hotline services. In line with this revised logic model that we developed based on the interviews and the information that we learned over the course of this study. This figure, which sort of illustrates the goals for a digital hotline, as well as the ways that hotline meets those goals, is available in the data brief that I'm going to have Allie put in the chat in a moment. We also have many more academic, thick articles that we've written focusing on different aspects of chat and text hotline, including the process of building connection and engagement, sort of what the service model looks like. And we should have pieces coming out in the next year on these outcome data as well as on safety planning on hotline. But if you're interested in a slightly more broad overview, the short brief summary that Allie I think has put in the chat is a really useful, more accessible way of sharing information about this service model with the community. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and take this opportunity to welcome Celinda from the Houston Area Women's Center, Director of Hotline Services. Is that your title? And I've got some questions for her. And while I am asking those questions, please feel free to put your questions for Celinda in the chat. But my first question for you, Celinda, is, based on the work that we've done and the incredible interviews that, I've gotten the chance to do with advocates over the last several years working on this project. One of the things that comes up frequently is the need to build safety for survivors, but also safety and support for staff. And so what I would wonder if you could share for us a little bit about is how do you build safety for staff doing this work.
Hey, Celinda, we can very lightly hear you. I'm a little bit closer.
No, maybe try a different mic or audio source. Uh-oh, the sound is completely gone. Mm. On your end of Zoom, you can click the audio. There's an up arrow on the audio at the bottom left corner, and then select microphone. Maybe try playing with those options first, see what happens.
Is that better?
Oh,
Yes.
perfect.
Yes. Perfect. Awesome. Sorry about the technical issue, everyone.
Uh-oh, sorry. It kind of went away again. Or it kind of went late again.
Let's see.
Thank y'all for being patient. It's Zoom. Things happen. It's okay. We just roll with it.
Anything better there?
That's great.
Yeah,
Hopefully it sticks this time.
that sounds good.
Great.
Okay, great. All right. So as I was saying, we know doing this work, the importance of self-care and how important it is to make sure that we're taking care of our staff. One of the things that the leadership of this team tries to do often is ensure that we are still somehow involved in the work. So making sure that we are still taking calls every once in a while, that we are still responding to chats every once in a while to really stay connected and understand what the staff is experiencing. Because one of the things that we know is that we're also very fortunate in this work to have very hardworking staff. And that sometimes, as much as we try to self-care because of what we do and because we truly care, it's hard for us to step away and kind of take time to ourselves. So ensuring that we are able to relate to the work that they're doing, ensuring that we're having open conversations, where we want to hear their feedback and how it makes them feel, doing this work is very important. And we have found that with chat, it definitely takes a little bit longer. So our calls tend to average about 20 minutes per call. Yet with chat, one of the things that we're seeing is that it often averages 40 minutes per conversation. So it's almost twice as much the time that you're spending. In addition to that, as much as we have very well-trained staff, it's staff with a lot of experience, with the chat, one of the things that we have found is that the staff tends to really be careful before responding. They want to ensure that they are processing everything correctly, that they're understanding everything correctly. So it is very important, for us to ensure that there is processing, after these chats, that we're opening space, to ensure that the staff is having conversation and that we are validating them for the work that they're doing. That we understand again that it's difficult work, and with chat it can be a little bit different. So with that said, being able to have these conversations where we're able to, to validate, all of the amazing work that they're doing.
Could you say something about some of the differences that you see between phone and chat?
I think that with every case we see something different. I don't think it goes away with the similarities that we have in how, what we're hearing and how we're responding. But I definitely think that we are a lot more careful with the use of words, with the language that we're using. We are definitely more conscious of how it will be interpreted. So the staff really, is one of the things that we saw them struggle with very early on. Well, how do I say this? Or how do I make sure that it doesn't sound this way? I think with voice calls, I think with just the tone of our voice, the comfort that we can add to the language, really, kind of makes up for misinterpretation sometimes. times, that they sincerely want to help. With language, if you don't choose the right words, and because you can portray, sort of like, that empathy, if you will, makes it a little bit more difficult, for the team, to immediately respond. So there was a lot of thoughtfulness in that. So as they've been working, for a long time, and now they know what choice of words seem to land better or are really, presented in a way that the person who's chatting interprets them in the way that they were intended to be delivered, then we definitely have seen that, confidence, build up. But a common thing that we see, when we do have staff who are, newer to the team is that they're very thoughtful in how they deliver the message.
Thank you. Please, everyone, you're all welcome to participate in this Q&A. So if you have questions for Celinda, please put them in the chat. And while you're thinking of those, can you say a little more about those sort of early weeks and months of being a chat and text advocate? What does that training look like, and how do you sort of support that onboarding?
So the onboarding for chat became the same as we currently have for Hotline in the sense of the required training, the onboarding, the amount of observation sessions someone had to be, had to complete. So in all that regard, we ensured that we equipped them with that. One of the things that very early on we were not prepared for was actually the amount of time that it was spending. So somehow in our mind, we thought maybe we can multitask, maybe we can still take a call, and then we can have the chat advocate take a chat. And very early on, we came to find that that was not the best way to handle it. Multitasking is definitely not recommended. The same way that you take one call at a time is the same way that it's important to take one chat at a time. In the nonprofit world, because oftentimes we try to do more with less. This is one example that I can tell you that it's very, very important to ensure that you have the capacity to ensure that that advocate focuses on one thing at a time. It is very important that they give their full attention to the person that they're speaking to. One of the reasons why we thought maybe multitasking might work out, because there were times when the person who was chatting would take long to respond. So it was this back and forth. So we thought, well, wait a minute, it seems like people are taking a little bit longer. It turns out that maybe the person who was chatting kind of was experiencing some of the same feelings that we had, that it was important that how we explained ourselves was important. So maybe there was more thoughtfulness, I think, also in the survivor in the way that they were expressing or sharing things, or simply because we know it's difficult that very first time that a survivor shares their story, that there is some hesitance, that there's still some fear, and some questions, or they're not quite sure that they're, ready to take this next step. But yeah, very early on, we came to find that, yeah, it was important to ensure that we were getting that person the individual attention, no matter what the scenario might have been, and even if they were taking longer to respond, is being patient, and just waiting, and giving them their space and giving them their time.
Can you share some of the common challenges that your team faces in supporting advocates over chat, supporting survivors over chat?
Yeah, so some of the challenge that we see is depends on the procedures or the services that they're looking for and how we manage that. So sometimes if we want to do, for example, a danger assessment, it's a little bit more complex because we particular at our organization use the Jacqueline Campbell Danger Assessments. It's a series of 20 questions. And one of the things that we often see in doing the assessment is that you're typically not going to get a yes or no question. People tend to share a story for every question, that you ask, which is great, right? We want them to process. We want them to have the support that they need. But it is a little bit more complex, with chat, because there are a lot of questions that then, results in a much longer, conversation. And sometimes one of the things that we've done for other areas that we also address. So for example, we do an assessment for housing, and that assessment also tends to take a little bit longer. And it is a little bit more difficult to do it, through chat communication. So we have adapted. We've tried to make tweaks in maybe shortening some of the questions for our housing assessment. Of course, for the danger assessment, you can't change anything. You have to ask as they come. But for other processes, we have made adjustments to how we're wording the questions to hopefully be able to reduce, the time. There are situations in which the person that's chatting is also then open to transferring from a chat to a phone call. That has also been very helpful. And of course, the idea is not to redirect them to call the hotline. For us, that would not work. We're a pretty busy hotline that would generate then waiting in line, possibly then being supported by a different crisis counselor. But in this case, the person who is chatting with the caller actually offers to call them directly. So instead of them making the hotline call in, then we're able to make that hotline call out. And if we are able to get then on a hotline call, then it will reduce some of that time spent, or a little bit more complex way to do some of those assessments that tend to be a little longer, that take a little bit longer in time.
Thank you. That's really helpful context to sort of the way that you manage some of the challenges of providing that kind of support, especially things like long, housing assessments that can be 20 minutes over the phone end up taking 2 or 3 hours. Which is one of the things that we saw looking at the transcripts sometimes, is just the dedication and the amount of effort that both the survivors and the advocates are putting into doing that kind of work.
And at the same time, we want to be respectful for those that actually chose, to
Yeah.
chat as their, preferred form of communication. So if that's the, what they prefer, then we still want to make sure that we make all of our service accessible. So yes, it's going to take a little bit longer, but we want to ensure that we're still respecting, their choice in terms of communication.
I really appreciate that. Welcome. If you've joined us recently, we're having a conversation with Celinda from the Houston Area Women's Center about digital hotline. If you've got questions for her, you are welcome to put them in the chat, and or raise your hand, and we can also have conversation that way. As you all are thinking, let's see. If anyone on this call is from an agency that is thinking about launching maybe a companion to their phone hotline, expanding to an SMS chat or a computer chat platform, what are some initial things that you think they should be keeping in mind? Or what are some initial recommendations you could provide about what next steps might look like?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing for us, even so for us as an organization, we had already been in talks to launch a chat line prior to the pandemic. The goal as the year started that year was that by December of that year, we were going to be able to launch it. We were going to do our research, in platforms and different things that were important to consider. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and we certainly moved a lot faster.
Yeah.
And it was very important that we did, because, for those of us that do that work, we know how difficult and complicated it became for survivors to be able to communicate and reach out for help. So very early on, one of the things that we knew we needed to take our time is because the confidentiality piece we know is such an important piece of the work that we do. So that was very important for us. Are these services confidential? Can we meet the needs to ensure that we do that? In combination with that, it was really important that we also worked with our IT department, because certainly we are experts in the work that we do, but not necessarily in the technology part of it. And it was very, very important that the experts in that area, really, shared their feedback, that they explored specifically what was important to look at. So we were not looking only in terms of confidentiality, we were also looking at cybersecurity. We were looking at the platform we were going, to choose and make sure that that was the right platform that met the needs that we had. as an organization as far as our concerns for confidentiality. So that was a lot of work that was invested in that. We reached out to other hotlines that had already launched their services to kind of hear their feedback and how the platforms that they were currently using were working for them, and whether we wanted to go with something that they were already using, or was our IT department actually recommending a different platform based on what we were sharing was important for us. So for anybody thinking about it, it is important to ensure that you as an organization feel 100% confident that you are going to be able to provide that confidentiality, that privacy, that security to ensure that clients' information is safe and remains safe, at any given time. So with added security measures and feeling very confident, that the platform we were using, which I think I did see the message come up on what platform. So we use the platform called Live Chat. That is the actual name, Live Chat. Very user friendly. It gives incredible information in terms of reporting to be able to measure performance, and how many chats are we reaching, maybe how many are we not getting to, average amount of time spent on the chats. It really gives a great information in terms of how we're performing as well.
Linda, in that same kind of space of, you shared that like Hawk picked live chat, what are some of the other platforms maybe that didn't work for this organization that y'all did kind of look at just as other options that could be available for agencies?
So to be quite honest with Ali, I don't remember the actual names of those off the top of my head. I do know that when we reached out to other organizations, they were using different ones than ours. But we can definitely look into that and find out what are also potential options, and maybe we can share it with the group, somehow.
You really highlighted the importance of making sure that that data is secure and safe. What are some other aspects of the platform that has made it helpful to you, or other features or bells and whistles that maybe you don't have but you'd like, or that have made this transition easier on you and your staff?
So one of the other pieces that we looked at was how long we wanted to keep the transcripts. So the platforms do have the ability of saving, the transcripts indefinitely, or it has the feature where it can completely just not keep the transcripts. They disappear, at the time that that you end the conversation. Or it gives you a certain amount of time. So if you needed to reflect back on the data, if you need to reflect back on the conversation, maybe for case management purposes, ensure that all the details that were shared, you're able to then incorporate into the database where you collect and keep client data. Then it could be helpful in that way. One of the things that we did hear in terms of best practices from other service providers that had been doing this work was that it was important to not keep the transcripts for a long period of time. So typically maybe a 24-hour period was what was recommended, but nothing beyond that. And that was part of also the way of keeping information, secure in terms of client information.
Thank you. If other folks have questions for Celinda, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Ali, if you have questions as well that have come up for you. Celinda, I'm curious, when you sort of reflect back on some of the data that were presented today, are there things that surprised you? Were there things that made a lot of sense, maybe? What was your reaction?
Well, it immediately made sense, especially when we're going through the pandemic and people couldn't make those phone calls. I cannot tell you the amount of calls that we receive with people just basically telling us, can you call law enforcement for me? Because I can't even pick up the phone and make that phone call. And that has continued to ring true, for those survivors where it is difficult for them to get away from, their abuser, and not even being able to make a phone call. Being able to reach out for help in this much more discreet, form of communication has been, I dare to say, life-saving in many occasions, because they just couldn't, reach out for help. So every time we would see that, during the pandemic when it would come up that I just can't make that phone call, truly just validated, that we had made the right decision and that we had moved a lot faster than we anticipated, but that we knew it was so important. So that's one of them. The other one is, just giving survivors more accessibility. Sometimes picking up the phone and making a phone call can be difficult. Finding the time, because either someone might be able to finally reach out for help or research information, maybe while you're at work, but you can make a phone call at work because maybe you're surrounded by other people. And if you share your story, other people are going to hear. So being able to share that, through our chat services and being able to share their experience, and be able to then connect and find the information that they needed so that they knew then what were the options that were out there, what resources, were out there for them, has also been incredibly helpful because we know that sometimes making those phone calls can be difficult. And the other one is just, talking about it. Some people are still, under the impression that maybe if they make a phone call, maybe their information is not confidential. And while hotline information is, not everyone knows that. So it was easier for them, to be able to see through our chat that they could immediately start the conversation by not sharing their name at all or giving a different name, not sharing the information that they didn't want at all, and probably even feel more comfortable ending the chat if at any point they felt uncomfortable or decided that maybe they weren't quite ready yet. So being able to, again, to give them that alternative form of communication, a more discreet form of communication, making it more accessible, in terms of, calling when it is most convenient for them. It gives them all of those options.
So Linda, I'm curious, one of the pieces of this study talked a lot about kind of that facilitating social presence, right? Like that there was a real person on the other side of this chat, that it wasn't a bot. And I'm curious if there were kind of tips, tricks, pro tips that you all found that kind of helped you show that you all weren't bots, that you were real people on the other side of the chat.
Yes, so that question actually still comes up today. Oftentimes, one of the first questions when we start the chat is, "Are you a real person?" So definitely, being able to see the way that, our advocate responds. The platform, by the way, also offers what they called canned responses. So you can have like these responses that are already set up, to be ready to, just use, to give that information. We as an organization decided to actually use only one canned response. And that's the one that immediately starting the conversation asks if they are in a safe space, to chat. So that was the one that it's been helpful because it automatically, pops up and that you got that out of the way because it's the most important part, right, in starting this work. So by not using a canned response, to a variety of different questions or things like that, I think is the way that you're able to more specifically ensure that the person who's chatting knows that you are a live crisis counselor, that you are there. So being able to also, when they're asking questions, responding back, to their question, responding back with the name if they did share their name, so that they know we are specifically addressing them, to them as a person and not just another person who's chatting. Those kind of details, have been important. Being able to use some of the skills and techniques that we already use, right? Over the phone, being able to, paraphrase things so that they know that we've picked up on the details, specifically of what they're sharing and what's part of their conversation or what might be important to them. All of those pieces is what's really, I think, been able to help validate, to the person who's communicating with us about that.
Fabulous. Thank you. Cindy also asked in the chat, were you transitioning into some type of online intake after the chat? So sort of how does that work? And I would, along with that question, just more broadly, how do you help people move from where they want to the chat and text interaction to other ways of being engaged, either with Hawk or with other support services?
So I think for us, once again, it was accessibility, right? So either we were going to, um, make it difficult in the sense that this might be the only way that they can communicate, and saying, well, okay, we can limit chat, to responding to only certain things, but then other things we would have to do over the phone. Like when we figured out that danger assessments were taking really long, housing assessments were taking very long, even our shelter assessments. If we were going to do a shelter assessment to have someone come into our shelter, that was very long. So it did come through our mind. Well, maybe we need to then move to a phone call, because that's just going to simply take too long. But then, really, again, respecting what that survivor was choosing, as a form of communication. I mean, clearly, if they were reaching out to us, you know, in chat, was because that's the way that they wanted to communicate. So we did make a few attempts early on, to ask if it was okay that we called them, or if it was okay that they called us. In some instances, we did have them call, but then it didn't make any sense that they were calling, because now they were going to get a new crisis counselor. It very quickly and easily became complicated. And we knew that that wasn't the right way, to handle it. So we merely made, another adjustment and decided, what, this is just going to take longer. This means that the staff that we have that's designated to chat then is going to have to stay in chat. Multitasking is no longer an option, or having someone, be on standby to do one, or the other, is just not an option. If we were able, to secure the funding to be able to have staff specifically designated to chat, then that's exactly what we needed to do. So we had good intentions. We were trying to reach to as many people as we could, because if you were, taking long on a chat, you're thinking, but I see 5 calls on hold, and I'm kind of just sitting here, like, maybe I can take it. But again, very quickly, came to the conclusion that that was just not the best way, to handle that, and made, those adjustments. So like I said before, one of the things that we've done is, try to shorten, some of the questions that we ask, or pose questions in which, in some cases, they're more, close-ended questions, so that we get a quicker response. Of course, we are always utilizing open-ended questions and helping, understand, the caller situation, or the person who's chatting situation. But when it comes specifically to the assessments, is how do we pose them, how do we set up these questions so that maybe it helps us move through them a little bit, faster.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I have one more question, and then just want to make sure that folks feel like they've gotten the chance to ask their questions in the chat, but otherwise, we'll be circling in for a landing. You talked a little bit at the beginning about how you support your staff. What is your approach to supervision and to sort of the career of a hotline advocate?
Oh my God. You're talking to someone who's been doing this work for over 22 years.
Yeah.
Who started, and have been in every position probably throughout the course of my career in this department, because it just holds a very special place in my heart. And I could not have the most respect for the people that do this work. I mean, I almost get emotional talking about it. Because I understand that it takes a very special person to do this work, because it's hard and difficult work. And we all do very difficult work. I mean, just in general, when you deal with these types of issues. But Hotline has to be constantly on their feet, ready to go. The people that we have on this team are incredible, critical thinkers, have incredible judgment, are ready to respond quickly, in an emergency. In a few years past, I actually started referring to us as the emergency room of our organization, because I couldn't put it in better perspective than that. I mean, that's what it feels like, because we are quickly, ready to respond in the most critical situations. So I have a lot of respect for them, and make sure that we are always, always ensuring that they know that we understand how difficult this work is, that we are so grateful for the work that they're doing, that we respect the work that they're doing so much, ensuring that we leave a safe, open space to express their concerns, to express their needs, so that we are constantly also, responding and attending to that, is very critical and very important to us. One of the things that we did with chat is that we created a channel in Teams that we call success stories. And after they take a chat, and if one of the survivors who's chatting leaves a message at the end, a review, then we actually take that snippet and we paste it into this channel. And when you read through those, oh my goodness, I mean, you just feel so connected to the work that we're doing, the mission that we have. I mean, it just truly reminds you why we're doing this work. Because the messages that they leave sometimes are just, oh my God, so heartfelt. And it just really, it almost boosts your energy of the work that you're doing, quite, all over again. So those are a few things, that we do in addition to, just doing some appreciation, things for them here and there, a lunch or a little small gift or things like that.
We've got one comment in the chat that is, I asked about the transitioning from working with an advocate face to face, because just seeing that survivors who reached out via chat kind of prefer that distance, or seeing that like as a simplicity, and kind of learning the options about whether it was helpful. And I'm like, one of my like a question I have is, how often are you seeing in the chat survivors like mentioning that the preference over chat? And if they, I mean, I think I can think of a few of like reasons why that is a preferred, but like some of the common things that survivors are saying, like, this is the choice, I chose this way because XYZ. Just kind of have a better understanding of why chat.
So we definitely hear my abuser is always with me. So this is the only way I can communicate. He doesn't work. We hear that a lot. He's unemployed. He doesn't work, or he never leaves my side, or he works from home. I mean, so many reasons why they can be in the households, but it's because the abuser is present. Another common one is, I'm at work right now, so I can't get on the phone, but I'm able to chat. So in between, attending to their work, or to a client that they themselves are working with, then they're able to, communicate in that format. Now, I will say that in the last few months, we did something new, and that is, I'm chatting because I call the hotline and the hotline is busy. The wait time for chat is non-existent. So a lot of our survivors have mentioned that in recent months. I called the hotline. I've been on hold for a long time, and they were being resourceful and found another way to communicate, which is awesome.
Immediate access.
Immediate access.
A goal of chat line.
Yes, yes.
Well, way to wrap it up, Allie. That's a nice bow on the top of the presentation. We have a little bit of time left if anybody else has questions. Otherwise, Alexis, I think you have some final housekeeping. We are so thankful to all of you for joining us today, and especially to Celinda for her expertise and sharing her experiences doing this incredible work. Thank you all for being here, and I'll hand it over to you, Alexis.
Alrighty, thank you so much for being here. Hold on one second. Oh, I got it. Awesome. Okay, so I need 1 second to just kind of drop in the chat our evaluation. Let me see. Got it right here. So if y'all could fill this out for us. Thank you so much to our presenters who did such an incredible job and shared just so much wisdom with us. Hold on. Sorry, I cannot multitask. I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat now. And if you can just fill that out for us before you head out, that would be incredible. We really do value your feedback. We take it into consideration as well in next year's conference. And thank y'all so much for spending the early part of your afternoon with us.
That's right. Thank you all for coming.
think we should wave. Bye.
Thank you, all three of you. That was great. I really appreciate it.
It was enjoyable to just like sit and listen and think about like as you were sharing parts of it, like to be able to reflect on it.
Mhm. So Linda, you just encapsulate so beautifully the, you can tell your love for your colleagues and your love for the work. It's very touching.
Oh, thanks. I really mean it. I mean, I just don't know how these amazing people do it every day. I mean, it is the favorite part of my job, so I love that I can still have some, some of that connection. We've actually been a little short-staffed, as is not uncommon, and I've been able to step in actually a lot more in the last few weeks, and it just really does remind me, why I do this work and really appreciate the work that they do. So
Yeah.
right when you've heard the